Yo, what's good? Jerry here, coming at you with another project breakdown. This time I'm going over my track Dance On Me that just dropped a couple weeks ago with my boy TINK. I want to shout out Dr. Fresh for playing this one in his Caller ID radio show. Let's dive into it.
Yo, here we are inside the project file, and like last time, the first thing I want to go over are the drums. Here's how they sound from the second half of the drop. So as you can hear, they're pretty swung, and they're a little darker this time compared to the samples that I used in On the Floor. So the reason for that is the more natural and acoustic sounding drums in this one match the darker vibe of the song. Starting with the kick drum, this is a kick that I made myself. If I remember correctly, the transient is from a Fabian Mazur sample, and then I made the tail myself using Operator. And then the claps here, I'm going to be giving these away, and they sound like this. So I've got some EQ on here, then an auto filter, because afterwards I'm running it through an overdrive. Nothing too crazy, just 9 or 10% on the dry wet. Then I'm soft clipping it with the glue compressor, and then I've got a reverb send here. For the hi-hats and some of these other high-pitched percussions, I've got some Noizu samples. His sample pack is awesome. And then there's some other percussion sprinkled throughout the track. Like right here, I've got this offbeat snare, as well as this glass sample, classic house 808 rim, and then a zap, which is an Uzi sample. Then going to the cowbell, I've got it up here in the sidechain bus, and the reason for that is because I wanted it sidechained to the kick. So it sounds like this. So like I said, it's very swung, and if I go ahead and open up the MIDI, now I take off the swing, you can hear how it sounds with no groove. So that swing really helps it by creating a more lively sound. Sounds like someone was actually playing it. Moving over to the first breakdown, there's a couple things I want to go over here. This is how it sounds with the basses, effects, as well as the subs. So that first bass that you hear, I call it the LFO snarl. I made that in Serum, and I'm going to go ahead and remake it and talk about how I went about it. But this is how it sounds one more time. So the cool thing about this one is you have the whole fade in going on for the first two bars. Then this third bar, which is 35 to 36, is kind of this transition. And then it goes to that LFO slowdown effect. So a similar patch that I just threw together here in Serum takes two sine waves, it FMs one into the other, where this one's an octave higher. And the key here is I have two LFOs set up. This first one is a ramp, and I've got it on envelope mode with the rate set to 3 bars. Then I have this other LFO, which is in FreeSync mode, and it's in trigger mode. So then over here in the matrix, I set the auxiliary source to macro 1, but I invert the modulation of the first LFO. So that means I can use this macro to transform or go between both of these LFOs. So here in the automation, you can see I have macro 1. It's both of these lanes here. It starts at 0%. And then I go ahead and I automate it up. So as I automate it, it transitions from using the first LFO to using both LFOs, where this period in the overlap. And then once it's at 1 or 100%, it's only this triangle LFO. Once it's getting to the transition period here, I take the rate of this FreeSync triangle LFO and I slow it down. So this is how it sounds as the entire patch. Then when I used the actual sound, I added a delay throw, which is just where you turn up the delay at the end of a sound to let it throw, as well as a reverb throw, because you don't want too much reverb on your bass, or really any at all. A little bit of EQ, compression, because you can see there are some peaks here in the LFO part, and I wanted to balance those out. And then this cool plugin that I like called Track Spacer, and this is similar to sidechaining, but it does it spectrally by analyzing an input frequency and ducking it at the prominent frequencies of that input sound. Next thing I want to talk about is this little laser. It's kind of fun, and it's also a noise sample, but I don't think there's any shame in using samples because I went ahead and I processed it, made it a little bit more unique. So if I go ahead and take off all the effects here, that's how it sounds. But I applied a frequency shifter, so going one by one, that's how that sounded now. Then I looked at a spectrum to get it in key. Probably doesn't matter because it's an effect sound, but I was also trying to line it up the best I could. Isotope trash. And that has a cool delay effect inside of it, which is kind of the whole resampling thing. Then a little bit of chorus to add some stereo width, put it farther back in the mix. And then a delay here, which is a delay send, as well as some reverb and an auto filter. So you can see that really helps make it an ambient sound, not bring too much attention to it, but really add some character to the track. The next thing I'm going to go over is the drop. And in this one, we've got an arrangement that's got the whole call and response vibe going on. So I talked about that a little bit in my on the floor video, but that's when you have a first section or a call and then a response across a few different bars. And the point of this is it creates a theme for the listener to latch onto while still giving them variation. So in these first two bars here, this is the part A, which is the call. And then at bar 51, you have the part B, which would also be the response. And then back at bar 53, it comes back to the part A after 2 bars. Then at 55, it would be the part B again. And then at 57 is the halfway point of the drop. And then that's when it comes back to the call. So to play it, this is how it sounds. So this part B is the section here with the cowbell, and it also has this kind of pitter-patter bass. Sounds like this. And then here's the cowbell. To talk about some of the basses here in the part A, I want to go over and show you guys how we made this one right here. So this is the main bass, it's the rolling bass. So I've got the preset right here, and this is going to be given away in the link below, but it's a digital wavetable here, this one, and then that's getting FM'd by this one over here, which is a basic shape sine wave, flange filter on here, and then you got the bend plus minus, and then this is for the pitch envelope as well as the gain on the OTT compressor. And then this LFO right here is controlling a few different factors like the noise level, the oscillator A level, as well as the resonance on the filter, the warp mode, which is FM, as well as this extra filter over here. Then for the other bass to talk about, we've got this one, which is the main bass that's in the second drop. And if I open up the patch here, I'm going to be giving this one away as well. And it's kind of a similar concept with a flange filter, and then sine wave, FM, and then I've got another warp mode, which is the ASIM plus minus. And then in the effects, got a lot of stuff going on. But that you can hear in the second drop, which is kind of this variation that you hear, which sounds like this, which is this one. So going back to it, in that part B, which stays consistent in both drops, but the part A is what changes between drop 1 and 2. This pitter-patter bass right here that I talked about, this is just a saw wave with a filter opening up and closing. And then I've got some processing on here, like multi-band compression as well as OTT. And that's kind of the same theme you can see throughout most of these basses. So in this case, I use a neutron, which I don't do too often, but common theme is OTT, multiband compression, as well as some saturation, distortion, and equalization. So here's the distortion that I was talking about. And then here, this effects rack, this is, let's see, I'm not exactly sure what I did with this. Okay, yeah, in the build up, I'm going ahead and I'm lowering the, as you can see, the low band, and that helps create tension into the drop. So this bass right here kind of gets teased during the build up and then played out through the drop. So after the post drop section, we got this main breakdown. And then the first breakdown I talked about was over here, but this one's twice as long. And with all the elements except the vocals, it sounds like this. So I mentioned this when I was talking about the drums, but I've got some percussion sprinkled throughout this breakdown here. And I think it's really important to have some type of percussive element playing in your breaks because it helps keep the people on the dance floor moving. It helps drive the track forward. So I've got these claps, shaker loop, the offbeat snare, and then some other stuff down here. Going over to the melodic elements, there's a lot of stuff here that helps fill out this breakdown. It's more ambient sounding. So you've got that laugh that I talked about, as well as this brass ambience. And fun thing is I use this in my Matoma remix, but it's pitched up 4 semitones, and I didn't warp it because I was able to get it in time. Just using the fades here, it sounds like this. So I've got some chorus on there to help push it back in the mix, widen it out, a little bit of OTT and whatnot. Then I'm taking out some of the high end here with an EQ, as well as another one with auto filter, and then delay and reverb. Some other ambient stuff I've got going on are these ahs, which sound like this. And then there's a reese right here, which is the main element. And you can hear the pitch envelope on that first note. Then there's some breaths, and they sound like this. So it's someone inhaling. I've got those bubbles that I made from Operator, as well as this down sweep, and I'll give this away as a sample as well. I made this in Serum. Then we've got the cowbell, kind of keeping the rhythm going, as well as a choir that was done in Contact. Then there's that effects laser from Noizu, as well as a string, which is just holding the root note of the track, and it's kind of the high up pitch string. It's a classic house staple. Then we've got some noise sweeps, as well as a little bit more ambience here with some atmosphere. So the last thing to go over in this one are the vocals. I've got a lot of processing on the main vocal, so I'm going to start off by turning it off and playing it back for you.
Dancing on me, she dancing on me, dancing on me.
So as you can hear, there's a lot of low end rumble in that, and the first thing we did was cleaned it up with an EQ, took out the low end, and then cut some of the highs. After that, we used this RVox compressor, which is one of the few plugins I use from Waves. And then we got an OTT at 13%, and then pushing it through an overdrive to add a little bit of grit to the vocal. After that, we've got a delay send, reverb send, utility, it's gain staging, as well as some more EQ to clean things up. Then here we've got a vocoder and redux, and this creates some variation in the pre-drop phrase of the second drop. So it sounds like this.
Dancing on me, wow, she dancing.
And then in context.
Dancing on me, wow.
Something else we did is we added these little phrases that we chopped up from that vocal, and it's the word dance, and we added a ping pong delay with the dry wet at 60%, and that adds some stereo width and movement to the vocal during the build-up. It sounds like this. and it's getting a slight sidechain from the main vocal, and that's to help keep it farther back in the mix, particularly those delay tails. And then here we did that same concept in the drop, but the dry wet of that delay is much lower, and we've got an auto pan moving it back and forth since the dry wet of the ping pong is lower. And then the last thing we added were some of these little vocal cuts, and they're from Decaps sample packs. He's the GOAT. Sound like this. And those just add some energy to the whole song and bring it all together.
Yo, be sure to check out the link below to download the samples from the track, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.